There are hinges in a life, moments that swing open doors you never knew existed, or slam shut the ones you believed would stand open forever. They are not always loud. Sometimes the most catastrophic shift is silent. A glance held too long, a name unspoken, a truth left to curdle in the dark. My hinge moment was supposed to be a wedding. It was supposed to be the crescendo of a life well lived, the perfect, sun-drenched chord that would resonate into a comfortable old age. I had the score all written out in my head. I was a fool. The day itself began as a masterpiece of borrowed perfection. The sun, as if on cue, spilled liquid gold over the rolling hills of the vineyard venue. It was a light so soft and forgiving it seemed capable of washing away all doubt. Laughter, delicate as champagne bubbles, drifted from the terrace where guests in their pastel finery mingled. It was a scene painted from a brochure for happiness, and I, Michael, was the star. My parents flanked me in the groom's suite, their pride a tangible warmth at my back. My mother adjusted my tie for the third time, her fingers fumbling with a nervous energy that was both endearing and suffocating. My father, a man of few words and sturdy silences, simply clapped a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that conveyed a lifetime of approval. In the mirror, I saw a stranger wearing my face, a man on the precipice of everything, his eyes bright with a naive, unshakable faith in the future. Then David entered, and the room seemed to brighten further. He was my best friend, my other half, the brother I'd chosen. We had navigated the treacherous waters of adolescence and the bewildering landscape of young adulthood together. He was the anchor to my drift, the boisterous laugh to my quiet smile. He clapped me on the back, his trademark grin splitting his face. "Big day, huh?" he said, the words a familiar, comforting rhythm. "The biggest," I agreed, the truth of it a heavy, wonderful weight in my chest. He was my best man. It was a role he was born to play. He'd planned the bachelor party, written a speech that would no doubt be equal parts heartfelt and humiliating, and stood beside me now, a bulwark against the overwhelming tide of the day. Emily was somewhere else in the sprawling estate, a whirlwind of lace and anxiety. I could picture her perfectly, fussing over a single stray thread on her veil, her brow furrowed in that meticulous way I adored. She was a woman who built her life with precision, and I loved being a part of the beautiful, orderly world she created. She was the final piece of my own puzzle, the one that made the entire picture make sense. Standing at the altar, the scent of lilies and old wood filling my lungs, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The world narrowed to the far end of the aisle. And then, a silhouette appeared, backlit by the afternoon sun. The guests turned, a single collective body, their sighs of admiration a gentle wave washing over the chapel. She was ethereal. That's the only word for it. A vision in white, gliding toward me, her face a serene portrait of love and promise. For one crystalline moment, I felt a sense of cosmic rightness so profound it almost brought me to my knees. This was it. The hinge was swinging open to a lifetime of sunlit rooms and shared laughter. And then David stepped forward. At first, I thought he was adjusting my boutonniere, or perhaps whispering one last crude joke to break the tension. It was his way, but he didn't whisper. He cleared his throat, a sound that cut through the reverent hush of the room like shattering glass. He raised a hand, not to me, but to Emily, a gesture of command that stopped her mid-stride. The air in the room didn't just shift, it solidified. It became a thick, unbreathable medium. "Wait," David said. His voice wasn't a shout, but it carried a weight that pinned everyone in place. It was firm, steady, and utterly alien. "This wedding can't happen." A confused murmur rippled through the pews. I turned to him, my mind struggling to process the words, to fit them into any logical context. Was this a prank? A horribly misjudged joke? I searched his face for the familiar glint of humor in his eyes, but found only a cold, hard certainty. Emily froze, her bouquet trembling, a small, violent tremor in the sudden stillness. "She belongs to me," David continued, his voice rising now, imbued with a theatrical, possessive arrogance. "I love her, and she loves me." The words were not daggers. A dagger is too clean, too quick. This was a bludgeon, a blunt instrument of pure malice, and it struck me squarely in the chest. The world went silent, save for the frantic, roaring pulse in my ears. I looked at Emily, my gaze a desperate plea for denial, for a sign, for anything that would tell me this was a nightmare from which I would soon wake. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Emily," I whispered, the name cracking, a fragile thing in the wreckage of the moment. She didn't answer. Instead, in a movement that seemed to stretch for an eternity, she took a deliberate step not toward me, but sideways. Toward him. Her head was bowed, a gesture of submission, of choice. The murmur of the guests erupted into a cacophony of gasps and shocked whispers. My mother's cry was a sharp, wounded sound. My father took a protective step toward the altar, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. But I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot by a force more powerful than gravity. My world, so carefully constructed, so beautifully designed, was not just crumbling. It was being detonated before my very eyes. And David, my best friend, my brother, was smirking. It wasn't a smile of happiness. It was a smirk of conquest. An arrogant, self-satisfied, utterly triumphant grin that said, "I won." He had not just participated in a game. He had invented it, rigged it, and was now celebrating his victory on the ashes of my life. "I'm sorry, Michael," Emily finally managed, her voice so small it was almost swallowed by the chaos. "But I can't do this." She took David's offered arm, and together, they turned their backs on me, on our life, on the 100 stunned witnesses to my public execution, and walked out of the chapel. They didn't run. They walked, a leisurely stroll away from the devastation they had wrought. The laughter that followed wasn't malicious, not at first. It was the nervous, incredulous laughter of people who cannot process what they've just seen. But to me, each chuckle was a shard of glass in my back. I don't remember leaving the altar. I don't remember the sympathetic hands on my arm or the pitying looks. I don't remember the car ride home. But I remember the smirk. It was burned onto the back of my eyelids, a permanent afterimage of my ruin. It was the face of betrayal in its purest form. And in the silent, hollowed-out shell of my childhood bedroom, that image began to smolder. Humiliation ignited into a cold, hard anger. Anger clarified into a singular, unyielding determination. This was not over. David might have stolen my bride and my dignity, but he had made a fatal miscalculation. He had underestimated the man he left standing alone at the altar. That smirk he wore so proudly, I would wipe it off his face. I would grind it into dust. And when that day came, he would regret ever crossing me. The hinge had swung, and the door it opened led straight to hell. I was prepared to walk right through it and drag him in with me. For 3 days, I existed in a gray limbo, a ghost haunting the familiar geography of my parents' house. The world outside my bedroom door was muffled, indistinct. My parents moved with a funereal quiet, their attempts at comfort clumsy and painful. "It's not your fault, Michael." Of course it wasn't my fault. That was the problem. Guilt can be reconciled. Mistakes can be learned from. This was different. This was an act of violation, a theft of self, and there was no lesson in it. Only the raw, gaping wound. Sleep offered no escape. When exhaustion finally claimed me, my mind replayed the scene on a relentless loop, a director's cut from hell. David's hand raised like a benediction of doom. Emily's averted face. The rustle of her dress as she walked away. And always, the crescendo, David's smirk, a mask of triumphant cruelty. I would wake with a gasp, the phantom weight of 100 pairs of eyes on my back. The world, inconsiderate as ever, refused to pause. My phone was a constant, buzzing torment. Texts from friends offered a spectrum of useless advice, from violent fantasies about David to platitudes about dodging bullets. Asterisk, she wasn't worth it, man. David was always a snake. I never trusted him. Asterisk, where was this chorus of Cassandras before I'd engraved invitations and paid for a 5-course meal for their plus ones? Their retroactive wisdom felt less like support and more like an indictment of my own blindness. It was on the 4th day that I made the mistake. Driven by a masochistic need to pour salt in my own wounds, I opened my laptop and navigated to the glittering, curated lies of social media. And there they were. The photograph wasn't professional. It was a candid shot, likely taken by a friend at a sun-drenched cafe. Emily and David. His arm was draped casually around her shoulders. Her head was tilted toward his, a genuine, radiant smile on her face. A smile I hadn't seen in months, I realized with a fresh stab of pain. They were holding hands across the table. The caption, written by some sycophantic acquaintance, read, *Love finds a way. Red heart # love wins star. Love wins, *. The phrase slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. I nearly hurled the laptop against the wall. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a PR campaign. They weren't hiding in shame or grappling with the fallout of their actions. They were celebrating. They were framing my public vivisection as a romantic victory. My existence, my pain, my humiliation, it had all been neatly erased from their narrative. I was collateral damage in their epic love story. The questions that had been swirling in the fog of my grief now sharpened into razor points. How long? How long had this been happening under my nose? Was I that much of a fool? My mind became a frantic archive, sifting through years of memories, recontextualizing every shared laugh, every inside joke, every lingering glance between them that I had generously labeled friendship. The time David had coincidentally shown up at the restaurant where Emily and I were having our anniversary dinner. The way they'd finished each other's sentences about a movie they'd both claimed to have seen separately. The little deceits, the subtle alignments, they weren't signs I had missed. They were clues I had refused to see, willfully blind in my own house of trust. The anger was no longer a slow burn. It was a white-hot forge. It melted away the self-pity, the grief, the shame. David hadn't just taken my fiancée. He had methodically dismantled my life, my trust, my past. He had played me for a fool and was now laughing about it over lattes. I stopped wallowing. I started digging. I spent hours scrolling through old text chains, photo albums, email threads. It was an agonizing form of self-flagellation, reliving the happiest moments of my life through the new, sickening lens of betrayal. A photo from a ski trip 2 years ago. Me in the center, Emily on one side, David on the other, his arm just a little too tight around her waist. A text from David canceling our weekly basketball game because of work, followed by an Instagram post from Emily showing a sunset from a hiking trail I knew was miles from her office. The patterns were there, a constellation of lies I'd been too starstruck to notice. This wasn't a spontaneous act of passion at the altar. This was a coup, meticulously planned and ruthlessly executed. The man I had considered a brother had been undermining me, plotting against me, for months, perhaps years. The depth of the deception was staggering. It wasn't just about Emily anymore. It was about the fundamental violation of a bond one believed was unbreakable. One evening, sitting in the dark, the blue light of my phone illuminating the damning evidence, a cold clarity settled over me. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a man with a purpose. I needed more than answers. I needed leverage. I needed to understand the full scope of his treachery, not just to heal, but to fight back. If David thought this was over, if he thought his victory was complete, he didn't know me at all. He knew the trusting friend, the easygoing partner, the forgiving soul. He was about to meet the man he had created at that altar, someone methodical, patient, and utterly unforgiving. That's when I picked up the phone and called Sophia. Sophia didn't operate out of a smoky, noir-inspired office. Her space was a sterile, minimalist loft in a converted warehouse, all polished concrete and exposed ductwork. It smelled of ozone and expensive coffee. She was as sharp and unadorned as her surroundings, hair pulled back in a severe bun, eyes that seemed to miss nothing, and a manner that was surgically devoid of sentiment. I'd worked with her once on a minor corporate espionage case for my business. She was relentless, discreet, and worth every exorbitant penny. She listened to my story without a flicker of pity or judgment, her fingers steepled under her chin. When I finished, the whole sordid tale hanging in the air between us, she didn't offer condolences. She offered a plan. "Tell me everything you know," she said, her voice a low, calm instrument, "and I'll find out the rest." The unraveling began. Sophia moved with a terrifying efficiency. She started with Emily, not out of malice, but out of strategy. She was the weak link, the emotional core of the betrayal. Sophia's team pulled digital receipts, cell tower data, social media tags, the mundane breadcrumbs of modern life that, when pieced together, told a story of profound deception. The picture she painted was uglier than I could have imagined. This wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was a targeted campaign of psychological warfare. David had preyed on Emily's deep-seated insecurities, her fear of not being successful enough, her anxiety about settling down. He had been a constant, whispering presence in her ear, subtly poisoning her against me. Sophia showed me their text exchanges, obtained through methods I didn't ask about. I read them in her silent office, my stomach churning with a toxic cocktail of rage and a strange, hollow pity for Emily. David, he's working late again? He takes you for granted. Asterisk. David, did Michael ever tell you about that conference in Chicago? Just be careful. Asterisk. David, you deserve someone who sees how incredible you are. Someone who would never put his work before you. Asterisk. He spun intricate lies about my infidelities, fabricated stories about my lack of commitment, each one a carefully placed drop of acid on the foundations of our relationship. He had played the concerned friend to both of us, positioning himself as the only one who truly understood her. Emily hadn't just fallen for him. She had been pushed, guided by a masterful manipulator who knew exactly which buttons to press. But that was just the emotional wreckage. The real devastation lay buried in the finances of the small tech startup David and I had built together from my garage. I had trusted him implicitly. He handled the books, the accounts, the investments. I was the innovator, the face of the company. He was the nuts and bolts guy, the one I relied on to keep the engine running. It turns out he'd been siphoning off the fuel for years. Sophia laid out the documents on her glass desk, a spiderweb of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and falsified invoices. David had been embezzling money, not in a desperate, clumsy way, but with the cold, calculated precision of a career criminal. He was systematically bleeding our company dry, funneling the funds into a secret account under a fictitious name. The scale of it was breathtaking. He wasn't just stealing my bride and my best friend. He was stealing my future, my life's work. He was preparing to leave me bankrupt and disgraced, holding the bag for his crimes while he and Emily disappeared into a life paid for with my money. I stared at the labyrinthine charts, the flow of my hard work and dreams draining away into his pockets. I looked up at Sophia, the anger of physical pressure in my skull. Why? I asked, the word hoarse. Why do all of this? Just to have her? It doesn't make sense. Sophia leaned back, her expression unreadable. Some people don't need a reason, Michael, she said quietly. For some people, the game is the reason. They don't just want to win. They need to see the other person lose. David hasn't just been winning at your expense. He's been feeding on it. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my entire life replaying in my mind's eye, but this time with the real script. Every time I'd celebrated a win for him, every time I'd covered for one of his mistakes, every time I'd defended his occasional recklessness as creative genius, it had all been part of his long con. He was never my friend. He was a parasite, and I had been the perfect host. I thought of Emily too. Her complicity was unforgivable, but now I saw the architecture of her coercion. She wasn't the mastermind. She was a pawn, another piece on his board to be sacrificed for his own ego. It didn't excuse her actions, but it shifted the focus of my rage. She was a symptom. He was the disease. By dawn, my mind was sharp and clear as glass. The pain was still there, a dull, permanent ache, but it was now fuel. David had intended to leave me with nothing, but he hadn't taken my mind. He hadn't taken my will. And now, thanks to Sophia, he hadn't taken the truth. It wasn't enough to expose him. It wasn't enough to send him to jail. He had made a spectacle of my destruction. His downfall had to be just as public, just as theatrical, just as devastating. The plan began to form, piece by intricate piece. A stage had to be set. An audience had to be gathered. And David, the star of his own twisted drama, would be given the finale he so richly deserved. He would never see it coming. Patience is a weapon. In the weeks that followed, I honed it to a razor's edge. Every instinct screamed for immediate confrontation, for a raw, cathartic explosion of rage. But strategy demanded subtlety. David's arrogance was his greatest weakness, and I needed it at its peak, bloated and blind, for my plan to work. He had to feel untouchable. The opportunity arrived via a stray comment from a mutual acquaintance, now a former acquaintance. David had moved, not into a modest apartment to lay low, but into a glass-walled penthouse downtown, a monument to stolen success. Sophia confirmed it was leased through one of his shell corporations, a purchase made with my money. He wasn't just living well, He was flaunting it. I chose a Tuesday evening. No call, no text. I simply appeared at his door, a ghost from the life he'd torched. When he opened it, his expression was a fascinating ballet of surprise, then caution, and finally, a deep, satisfying satisfaction. He thought I was broken. He thought I had come to beg for answers, to plead, to offer him the final satisfaction of seeing me grovel. "Michael," he said, leaning against the doorframe with a practiced ease, as if my presence were a minor but amusing inconvenience. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "We need to talk, David," I said, my voice unervingly calm, a placid lake over a churning abyss. He ushered me in, playing the magnanimous host. The apartment was an insult in glass and steel. It looked out over the entire city, the twinkling lights a glittering carpet laid at his feet. He offered me a drink from a bar stocked with top-shelf liquor I knew for a fact our company couldn't afford. "Emily's not here," he said, pouring himself a generous measure of scotch. "She's out with friends. Still adjusting, you know. These things, they take time." "These things," I repeated, letting the question hang in the air. "You mean like publicly humiliating your best friend and stealing his fiancée at the altar?" David chuckled, a low, condescending sound. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "Come on, Michael. Don't be so dramatic. You and I both know you and Emily were on fumes. I just did you a favor, sped up the inevitable." My hands curled into fists in my pockets. "Stay calm. Stick to the plan." I forced a sigh, feigning a weary resignation. "You're probably right," I said, sinking into a ridiculously expensive leather armchair. "She wasn't who I thought she was." I paused, then looked him directly in the eye. "And neither were you." That landed. Just a flicker, a momentary tightening around his eyes, but it was there. His smirk faltered. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I know," I said, my voice dropping, each word a carefully placed stone. "About everything. The money, David. The shell companies. The accounts you thought no one would ever find. All of it." For the first time since he'd opened the door, David looked genuinely unsettled. He set his glass down on the marble countertop with a sharp click. His movements were slower, more deliberate, the casual grace gone. "I don't know what you're talking about." The denial was automatic, but his voice was a shade too tight. "Don't insult my intelligence. You've been bleeding the company dry for years. Setting it up so I'd be the one left holding the empty bag when it all collapsed," I said, leaning forward. "You didn't just betray me personally. You planned to ruin me completely. And for what? So you could have her in this." I gestured around the opulent room. "Was my life the price tag for your new sofa?" He tried to laugh, but it came out as a strangled bark. "You're delusional. You have no proof." The tremor in his voice betrayed him. "Oh, but I do," I said, pulling out my phone. I didn't have everything with me, of course. Just a taste. A carefully selected audio clip Sophia had procured. A 30-second snippet of a phone call between David and one of his shady offshore bankers, discussing a recent transfer. It was vague enough to be deniable in court, but specific enough to be terrifying to him right now. I pressed play. The tinny, recorded voice of his accomplice filled the silent room. David's face went ashen. "You've been spying on me," he hissed, his composure finally cracking. "Spying?" I pocketed the phone. "No, I've been uncovering the truth. And here's the thing, David. I'm not here for an apology. I'm not here to give you a chance to explain. I'm here to let you know that your time is up." He rallied, puffing out his chest in a desperate display of his old bravado. "What are you going to do, Michael? Run to the cops? They won't believe you. It's your word against mine." "Not yet," I admitted, standing to leave. The seed was planted. That was all that mattered. But soon, I left him there, standing alone in his stolen kingdom, the swagger gone, replaced by the frantic, darting eyes of a cornered animal. The confrontation wasn't about victory. It was about introducing the variable of fear into his equation. It worked. Sophia's surveillance showed him making a flurry of panicked calls, moving money, his carefully constructed world now trembling. He was off balance. And that's exactly where I needed him to be. Then, a week later, my phone rang. An unknown number. I almost ignored it, but some instinct made me answer. "Michael." I didn't recognize the voice at first. It was thin, frayed, stripped of all its familiar confidence. It was Emily. I need to talk to you," she stammered. A year ago, hearing her voice would have been a balm. Now, It was like hearing a song you once loved that's been used to advertise something cheap and ugly. "I'm listening," I said, my tone glacial. I was wrong. The words came in a rush, a torrent of guilt held back too long. About everything. About you. About him. He's not who I thought he was. He's not who he told me he was. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Funny how that works. What was the first clue? Did he run out of my money to spend on you? She flinched, a small, wounded sound over the line. "I deserve that," she whispered. "But it's not that. I found something. Documents. In his home office. Proof of what he's been doing to the company. Michael, he's a monster. He was planning on framing you for all of it." The irony was so thick I could choke on it. The woman who had helped him destroy me was now offering me the very weapon I needed. "And now you want my help?" I asked, incredulous. "No," she said, her voice cracking. "I don't expect anything from you. I want to make it right. Or as right as I can. I'm so sorry for what I did to you. For believing him." Her apology was a ghost in the room, heavy and useless. It couldn't rebuild the chapel. It couldn't unsay the words. It couldn't erase the smirk. "Sorry doesn't fix it, Emily. You made your choice." "I know," she said, her voice thick with tears. "But I want to help you. If you're going after him, and I know you are, I'll testify. I'll give you the documents. I'll do whatever it takes." I was silent for a long time, weighing the offer. Trusting her was out of the question. But using her? That was a different matter entirely. She was a key. She could open doors Sophia and I were still trying to pick. David had used her as a pawn to destroy me. It seemed only fitting I use her as a pawn to destroy him. "Send me the documents," I said finally, my voice devoid of emotion. "We'll go from there." Hanging up, I felt a strange sense of equilibrium. Not forgiveness, not vindication, but the cold satisfaction of a general acquiring a new, powerful piece of artillery. Emily had chosen her side on my wedding day. Now, she had chosen a new one. She might have been David's prize, but she was about to become my weapon. The game had changed again. The final act required a stage, and David, in his infinite arrogance, built it himself. He was throwing a party. Not just any party, but an extravagant farewell bash. Sophia's intel, gleaned from a loose-lipped associate, was that David was finalizing a deal to sell off his stolen assets and was planning to leave the country with Emily. This party was his victory lap, a final toast to his own genius before disappearing into the sunset. It was perfect. A curated audience of his sycophants, business partners, and admirers. All the people he'd lied to, all the people whose respect he craved, gathered in one room. They would be the witnesses to his coronation, and instead, I would give them an execution. "This is high risk," Sophia warned as we finalized the details in her office. "The city lights a cold fire outside her window. If he gets a whiff of this, he's gone." "He won't," I said with a certainty that surprised even myself. "His ego is a blindfold. He's too busy admiring his crown to notice the guillotine." The plan was a symphony of deception. I would attend the party, a specter at his feast. My presence alone would be a psychological jab, making him feel secure in his victory over me. Emily's role was pivotal. I still didn't trust her, but her desire for self-preservation was a powerful motivator. Her job was to be the loving fiancé, to inflate David's ego to its bursting point and, at the precise moment, lead him to a quiet corner of the penthouse. A corner Sophia had ensured was fitted with a high-fidelity recording device. Meanwhile, Sophia would be coordinating with the authorities, feeding them our verified evidence in real time. The arrest would not be made based on my word, but on his own, delivered from his own mouth, at his own party. The night of the party, I walked into the penthouse and was met with a wall of sound, clinking glasses, throbbing bass, and the braying laughter of the city's elite. The air was thick with expensive perfume and self-congratulation. And in the center of it all, a king holding court, was David. He saw me, and for a heartbeat, his practiced smile faltered. But it returned, wider and more condescending than ever. He thought I'd come to watch him win. "Michael," he boomed, striding toward me. "Glad you could make it. No hard feelings, right?" "Wouldn't miss it for the world," I replied, my smile a thin, sharp blade. "It's going to be a night to remember." He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that once meant brotherhood and now felt like a brand, and moved on, swallowed by his adoring crowd. I melted into the background, a silent observer, nursing a glass of sparkling water and watching the final pieces click into place. Emily was a brilliant actress. She clung to his arm, laughed at his jokes, her eyes full of a carefully fabricated adoration. She made him feel like the most powerful man in the world. As the night wore on, she guided him toward the designated corner, away from the main throng, under the pretense of a private moment before his big announcement. Sophia had done her work. The recorder was live. I watched from across the room as David, fueled by champagne and hubris, began to boast. That idiot never saw it coming. His voice, captured and amplified by the hidden device, dripped with contempt for me. Michael's too soft, too trusting. I almost feel bad for him. Almost. Emily played her part. What about the business? All your hard work. David's laugh was ugly. The business is a sinking ship. I took what I needed. By the time anyone figures out the books are cooked, I'll be sipping cocktails on a beach that doesn't have an extradition treaty. And Michael? He'll be the one taking the fall. It's perfect. That was it. The confession. The final nail. With a subtle text to Sophia, I gave the signal. Moments later, the party's pulsing rhythm faltered. The music didn't stop, but a new, discordant element entered the room. 3 uniformed police officers and 2 plainclothes detectives, moving through the crowd with a quiet, implacable purpose. The river of chatter slowed to a trickle, then stopped. Heads turned. A hush fell over the penthouse. David noticed the shift, his brow furrowing in confusion. He looked up just as the lead detective approached him. "David Carter," the detective said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy." The color drained from David's face. The confident king evaporated, replaced by a pale, stammering man. "What? This is a mistake. A misunderstanding." That was my cue. I stepped forward from the shadows, moving into the circle of stunned silence that surrounded him. I locked eyes with him, and in their depths, I saw not anger or defiance, but pure, unadulterated fear. "No mistake, David," I said, my voice as cold and clear as the glass in his hand. "The only mistake was thinking you could get away with it." His head whipped back and forth between me and the officers, his mind scrambling, the pieces clicking together in a horrific mosaic. He looked at Emily, who stood stone-faced, her expression unreadable. His so-called friends and admirers stared, their faces masks of shock and dawning disgust. He was utterly, completely alone. "Michael, wait," he pleaded, his voice cracking as an officer took his arm. "We can fix this. We can talk about this." I crossed my arms. "You had your chance to talk. You chose to smirk instead." As they cuffed him, the smirk that had haunted my waking and sleeping hours was gone. In its place was the slack-jawed, desperate expression of a man whose entire world had just been pulled out from under him. The whispers in the crowd grew into a roar of condemnation. The god had fallen, and his worshippers were the first to stone him. They led him away, a disgraced king dethroned in his own castle, the sound of his pathetic protests swallowed by the closing elevator doors. The party was over. I stood there for a moment, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away, leaving a strange, quiet calm in its wake. Emily looked at me from across the room, a ghost in a party dress. I gave her a slight, final nod, a dismissal, and turned to leave. There was nothing left to say. Outside, in the cool night air, Sophia was waiting by her car. She was smiling, a rare, genuine smile. "That went well," she said. I looked up at the penthouse, a glittering cage now empty of its predator. "Better than I imagined," I replied, taking my first clean breath in months. The humiliation he had inflicted on me had been repaid in full, in public, and with devastating precision. His life was in ruins. And mine, for the first time since that day at the altar, was finally beginning again. The fallout was a media firestorm. David Carter, the golden boy, became the poster child for greed and betrayal. His name, once a synonym for success, was now a punchline. The trial was a formality. With Emily's testimony, Sophia's mountain of evidence, and David's own recorded confession, the verdict was swift and decisive. Guilty on all counts. The last time I saw him, he was being led from the courtroom, a hollowed-out man stripped of his charm, his money, and his freedom. The smirk was a distant memory. I felt no triumph watching him go, only a profound sense of closure, like closing a heavy, dark book. Emily sent me one letter a few months after the sentencing. She was leaving the city, starting over somewhere small and anonymous. She didn't ask for forgiveness, only to say that she was working on forgiving herself. I never replied. Her chapter was closed, too. Life rebuilt itself, slowly at first, then with gathering momentum. The company, though wounded, survived. I poured my energy into salvaging it, finding a new kind of purpose in the patient work of reconstruction. It was harder, doing it alone, but it was cleaner. It was mine. Through it all, Sophia was there. Our relationship, born in the ashes of my old life, evolved from a professional alliance into a quiet, steady friendship. She was the antithesis of everything I'd known, blunt where others were evasive, practical where others were emotional. She didn't coddle my pain. She respected my strength. One evening, months later, we were walking through a park as the sun set, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple. "Do you regret any of it?" she asked, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "The wedding, the business with him, any of it?" I thought of the man I was at the altar, so certain, so naive. I thought of the crushing humiliation, the sleepless nights, the cold rage that had become my only companion. I thought of the complex, ugly path I had walked to get to this moment of peace. "No," I said, and the truth of the word surprised me. "I don't. Because without all of that, I wouldn't be here." And here, I looked from the sunset to her, her sharp profile softened by the fading light, is a good place to be. The story did not end with a spectacular victory, but with a quiet dawn. David had tried to burn my world down, but from the ashes, something stronger had grown. He hadn't destroyed me. He had, in the end, inadvertently forged me. I was not defined by his betrayal. I was defined by my survival, by the quiet strength found in rebuilding, and by the knowledge that the most profound victories are not the loud ones that tear things down, but the silent ones that build a new life, piece by resilient piece.